I'm sitting in my car outside the courthouse, hands still shaking from what just happened. The judge dismissed the case, all charges dropped. My former boss won't be getting a dime from me. But I can't shake the feeling that winning might have cost me something I didn't even know I had to lose. Maybe I should start from the beginning. 3 months ago, I was Kathleen Murphy, mid-level marketing coordinator at Sullivan & Associates, a boutique consulting firm in downtown Boston. Unremarkable job, unremarkable life, unremarkable me. I kept my head down, did my work, and tried not to think too hard about the fact that at 32, I was still living paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment in Southie that smelled faintly of the pizza place downstairs. The only remarkable thing about my life was how hard I'd worked to make it unremarkable. Growing up in a triple-decker in Dorchester where every conversation was a potential landmine, where my mother's mood swings could turn a family dinner into a screaming match, where keeping secrets was survival. I'd learned that flying under the radar was the safest way to exist. In an Irish Catholic household where image was everything and dirty laundry stayed buried, silence wasn't just golden, it was mandatory. My boss, Michael Sullivan, was everything I thought I wanted to be: confident, successful, respected. He drove a BMW, wore custom suits from his tailor on Newberry Street, and spoke with the kind of authority that made clients write big checks. He was also married to Elizabeth, a pediatric surgeon at Mass General who was beautiful, brilliant, and completely devoted to their 2 young daughters, Emma and Grace. The perfect Boston power couple, he conquered corporate boardrooms while she saved children's lives, and together they lived in a sprawling colonial in Newton that looked like something out of a magazine. I'd been working for Michael for almost 2 years when I first noticed the changes. Late meetings that ran past Elizabeth's bedtime calls home. Hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when I walked into his office. Credit card receipts for restaurants I knew Elizabeth was too busy to visit, places like Mistral and L'Espalier that required reservations weeks in advance, flowers charged to the company account but never delivered to our office. There were text messages that lit up his phone during client meetings, making him smile in ways I'd never seen during actual business calls. The rational part of my brain told me it wasn't my business. Michael's personal life had nothing to do with my job performance reviews or my ability to coordinate marketing campaigns. But there was another part of me, the part that remembered being 8 years old, finding my father's love letters to his secretary in his briefcase while looking for batteries for my Game Boy that couldn't ignore what I was seeing. That part of me recognized the signs because I'd lived through their aftermath. Growing up, Sunday dinners at the Murphy house were sacred. My mother, Patricia, would spend hours preparing elaborate meals that none of us really enjoyed, but we went through the motions because appearances mattered. "What will the neighbors think?" was her constant refrain. But even as a child, I could see the cracks in our perfect facade. The way my father, Sean Murphy, would glance at his phone during grace. The way my mother's smile would falter when she thought no one was looking. The way conversations stopped abruptly when I entered a room. The breaking point came on a Thursday in March. I was working late, finishing a presentation for Michael's morning meeting with the Beacon Hill Development Group, when I heard voices from his office. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see Michael with a woman I didn't recognize, auburn-haired, probably mid-20s, definitely not Elizabeth. She was crying, her mascara smudged, clutching a tissue. "I can't keep doing this," she was saying, her voice thick with tears and what sounded like a slight South Shore accent. "You said you were going to leave her." "It's complicated, Amanda. The girls, Elizabeth's practice, the house, everything's intertwined. You know that. It's been 8 months, Michael. 8 months of hotel rooms and lies and me pretending I don't care that you go home to her every night. 8 months of watching you play happy family on Instagram while I sit alone in my apartment in Cambridge. I should have left. Should have grabbed my things and gotten out of there before I heard any more. Instead, I stood frozen in the hallway, my laptop bag cutting into my shoulder, watching my boss comfort his mistress while his wife was probably at home reading bedtime stories to Emma and Grace. The scene felt sickeningly familiar, like watching a movie I'd seen before, one that had ended badly for everyone involved. The woman, Amanda, left first, her heels clicking angrily across the marble lobby. Michael emerged a few minutes later, straightening his tie, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair, and nearly jumped out of his skin when he saw me. "Katie. Christ, I didn't realize you were still here." "Just finishing up the Beacon Hill presentation," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, falling back on the nickname he'd used since my first day. "I'll have it ready for your 9 o'clock. He studied my face for a moment, and I could see him calculating, trying to figure out what I'd seen, what I knew. His Irish complexion had gone pale, making his freckles stand out like scattered pennies. Finally, he nodded. Good. Make sure to highlight the ROI projections in the executive summary. And Katie? That was a client meeting. Confidential stuff. We stood there for a moment in the empty office, the weight of unspoken knowledge hanging between us like incense in the cathedral where I'd spent countless Sundays as a child, learning that some sins were spoken aloud and others were buried deep. Then Michael grabbed his coat and left, and I was alone with a secret I didn't want to carry. For 3 weeks, I tried to pretend I hadn't seen anything. I did my job, answered Michael's emails, scheduled his meetings, and tried not to think about Elizabeth Sullivan and her daughters. But the secret felt like a stone in my chest, growing heavier every day. Every time I passed St. Anthony's on my way to work, I thought about confession, about the relief that was supposed to come from speaking truth aloud. But this wasn't my sin to confess. The routine helped maintain the illusion. Morning coffee from the Dunkin' on State Street, reviewing Michael's calendar, fielding calls from clients who thought our boutique firm could solve all their problems. But underneath the normalcy, I was drowning in other people's lies. The final straw came when Elizabeth herself called the office. I'd spoken to her many times before. She was always warm and friendly, asking about my family, remembering details from previous conversations that made me feel seen in a way I wasn't used to. Her voice carried that distinctive Boston Brahmin accent, refined but not pretentious, the kind that spoke of good breeding and better manners. Hi, Kathleen. It's Elizabeth. Is Michael available? I wanted to discuss our anniversary dinner plans. Their 15th anniversary. I knew because Michael had asked me to book a table at number 9 Park for the following week, the same restaurant where I'd seen charges for his lunches with Amanda. He's in a meeting. I lied, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Can I have him call you back? Of course. Oh, and Kathleen? Thanks for always taking such good care of him. I know how demanding his schedule can be, especially with the new clients you've been bringing in. You're such a treasure. The genuine gratitude in her voice broke something inside me. Here was a woman thanking me for enabling her husband's deception, and she didn't even know it. She was praising me for being a good assistant while I was helping her husband lie to her face. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my small apartment, past the framed photos of saints my mother had given me when I moved out, past the Boston College diploma that represented 4 years of student loans I was still paying off, past the window that looked out onto the harbor where the lights of Logan Airport blinked in the distance. I kept thinking about my mother, about all the times she'd suspected my father was cheating but never had proof, about how that uncertainty had eaten her alive, turned her into someone suspicious and bitter and broken, about how different things might have been if anyone, had just told her the truth. Patricia Murphy had spent years in that liminal space between knowing and not knowing, between suspicion and certainty. I remembered finding her crying in the laundry room one Sunday after Mass, surrounded by my father's shirts, checking his pockets for evidence she was too afraid to find. She'd made me promise never to tell anyone what I'd seen that day, her vulnerability, her desperation, her fear. Some things are private, Kathleen, she'd said, wiping her eyes with a dish rag. Family business stays in the family. But that philosophy had nearly destroyed us all. By Friday morning, I'd made my decision. I waited until Michael left for his lunch meeting, the one I knew was with Amanda, and then I called Elizabeth. Elizabeth, it's Kathleen from Michael's office. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. There's something I need to tell you. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. I could hear the sounds of Mass General in the background, the beeping of monitors, the chatter of medical staff, the controlled chaos of a children's hospital. Is it about Michael? She finally asked, her voice small. Yes. Another silence. Then, can you meet me at the Thinking Cup on Newberry Street in an hour? I'm just finishing rounds. I found Elizabeth in the corner booth, still in her scrubs with a white coat draped over the chair, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, like the confident surgeon I knew had been replaced by someone made of glass. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the kind that came from saving children's lives all day and then coming home to suspicions she couldn't voice. How long? She asked before I'd even sat down. I don't know for sure. At least 8 months, maybe longer. She nodded, staring into her coffee. Her name is Amanda. You knew? I suspected. Michael's been different. Distant. I found receipts for places we've never been together, caught him texting at strange hours. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. I hired a private investigator last month. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. Then why did you want to meet? Because I needed to know if I was losing my mind, if I was being paranoid and jealous, or if my instincts were right. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Thank you for confirming what I already knew. Thank you for caring enough to tell me. We sat in silence for a few minutes, two women bound together by the wreckage of someone else's choices. Outside the window, Boston moved past us, tourists following the Freedom Trail, students heading to class, business people rushing to meetings. The city went on while our small corner of it fell apart. What are you going to do? I asked. I don't know yet. I need time to think, to plan. The girls. She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders in a way that reminded me she saved children's lives for a living. But whatever I decide, it will be my choice, based on facts instead of suspicions. You gave me that. I'm sorry, I said and meant it. I'm sorry this is happening to you. Don't be sorry for telling me the truth, she replied firmly. Be sorry that it needed to be told at all. I went back to work that afternoon feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I'd done the right thing. I'd chosen truth over convenience, courage over cowardice. For once in my life, I'd been brave. I thought about calling my therapist, Dr. Ryan, to tell her about this breakthrough, how I'd finally broken the cycle of silence that had defined my family for generations. The feeling lasted exactly 3 hours. Michael stormed into the office at 4:30, his face flushed with anger. He didn't even pretend to close his office door, and I could see our co-workers, Jennifer from accounting, Tom from business development, trying to look busy while obviously listening. What the hell did you think you were doing? I'm sorry. Don't play dumb with me, Katie. Elizabeth called me an hour ago. She knows about Amanda. She knows everything. I could feel my co-workers' eyes on us, the entire office holding its breath. But I stood my ground, channeling something my grandmother used to say. A Murphy never backs down from the truth. I did what I thought was right. Right. His voice cracked with fury, his careful composure completely gone. You destroyed my marriage. You destroyed my family. My daughters are going to grow up in a broken home because you couldn't mind your own goddamn business. Your daughters are going to grow up in a broken home because you cheated on their mother. I shot back, surprising myself with my boldness. The words came out with a force I didn't know I possessed, carrying 20 years of things I'd never said to my own father. I didn't destroy anything. I just refused to help you lie about it. Michael's face went white, his freckles standing out like spots of blood on paper. For a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. Instead, he leaned across my desk, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than his shouting. Clean out your desk. You're fired. And if you think this is over, you're wrong. I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. I've got connections all over Boston, Katie. I'll make sure every firm in the city knows what kind of person you really are. I packed my things in silence while my co-workers pretended to be busy with their own work. Nobody met my eyes. Nobody said goodbye. Jennifer, who I'd had lunch with dozens of times, suddenly found her computer screen fascinating. Tom, who usually cracked jokes to lighten the mood, was nowhere to be seen. The same people who'd complained about Michael's arrogance behind closed doors were now too afraid to even acknowledge my existence. I took the tea home to Southie, my cardboard box of personal items balanced on my lap, watching Boston blur past the windows. The city looked different somehow, less welcoming, more judgmental. I thought about all the job applications I'd have to fill out, all the interviews where they'd ask why I left my last position. The truth seemed both too complicated and too simple. I told the truth when everyone else wanted to keep lying. 2 weeks later, I was served with papers at my apartment door. Michael was suing me for defamation, intentional interference with contractual relations, and breach of confidentiality. He was seeking damages of $500,000, money I didn't have, would never have. The legal documents were thick and intimidating, full of whereas clauses and party of the first part language that made my head spin. My lawyer, a tired-looking public defender named Connor Martinez, was brutally honest about my chances when we met in his cramped office in Government Center. Technically, you were acting as an agent of your employer when you learned about the affair. There's an argument that you violated confidentiality agreements. The defamation claim is weaker. Truth is generally a defense, but he doesn't have to prove you lied, just that you damaged his reputation. So I'm screwed. Maybe. Depends on the judge, depends on the jury. Depends on how well we can argue that you had a moral obligation that superseded your legal one. He shuffled through my file, his Harvard law diploma hanging crooked on the wall behind him. Sullivan's got expensive lawyers, O'Brien, Flanagan, and Associates. They're going to paint you as a vindictive employee who destroyed a family out of spite. The months leading up to the trial were the hardest of my life. I couldn't find work. Michael had made good on his threat to blackball me in the industry. Every interview I managed to get ended with awkward questions about why I'd left Sullivan and Associates, and I could see the exact moment when potential employers decided I was too much of a risk. I burned through my savings paying lawyer fees and living expenses. I had to move back in with my mother in our old triple-decker in Dorchester, the woman I'd spent 15 years trying to distance myself from. This is what happens when you stick your nose where it doesn't belong, she told me on the second night, not looking up from her crossword puzzle. We were sitting in the same kitchen where I'd grown up, where family secrets had been buried under layers of routine and respectability. Some people never learn. I did the right thing, Ma. The right thing. She looked up then, her eyes sharp with the bitterness that had defined her since my father left. The right thing would have been keeping your mouth shut and keeping your job. Now look at you, 32 years old, living in your childhood bedroom, about to be sued for everything you don't have. But something strange happened as the trial date approached. I started getting messages from people I barely knew, former coworkers, clients I'd interacted with, even strangers who'd heard about the case through social media or word of mouth in Boston's tight-knit professional community. Most of them shared similar stories, affairs they'd witnessed and stayed silent about, lies they'd watched destroy families, moments when they'd chosen comfort over courage and regretted it ever since. I wish I'd been as brave as you, wrote a woman named Bridget whose best friend's husband had been cheating for years. Maybe their kids wouldn't have had to find out by walking in on them. Thank you for doing what I couldn't, said a man named Patrick whose sister had been the last to know about her husband's second family in Quincy. Someone should have told her. Someone should have cared enough to tell her. The messages didn't change my legal situation, but they changed something in me. For the first time since Michael had fired me, I felt like maybe I hadn't made a mistake. Maybe the cost was worth it. One message stood out from the rest. It was from a woman named Catherine O'Malley, who wrote, "My father had an affair when I was 12. Everyone knew, neighbors, coworkers, even some of my friends' parents. But no one told my mother because it wasn't their business. She found out 3 years later when the other woman showed up at our house, pregnant. By then, the humiliation was so much worse because everyone had been pitying her behind her back. She never got over it. She deserved better. Elizabeth Sullivan deserves better too." The trial began on a gray November morning that felt appropriate for the occasion. The Suffolk County Courthouse loomed over Government Center like a granite monument to justice, its neoclassical columns and imposing facade meant to inspire confidence in the system. I climbed the steps slowly. My best suit, a navy blazer I'd bought for job interviews that never led anywhere, feeling inadequate against the grandeur. Michael looked every inch the successful businessman, flanked by expensive lawyers and radiating wounded dignity. He'd lost weight since I'd last seen him, his face drawn with stress, but his suit was still perfectly tailored and his handshake firm when he greeted the judge. I sat at the defendant's table with Martinez, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. The gallery was fuller than I'd expected. Elizabeth sat in the third row, her face carefully neutral, flanked by what looked like family members. My mother was there too, in the back, her expression unreadable. I spotted several former coworkers, some clients, and people I recognized from the neighborhood. Word had gotten out, and Boston's tight-knit professional community was watching. Michael's attorneys from O'Brien, Flanagan, and Associates painted me as a vindictive employee who'd betrayed her employer's trust, destroyed a marriage out of spite, and caused irreparable harm to 2 innocent children. They brought in character witnesses who testified to Michael's reputation in the business community, his charitable work with the Jimmy Fund, his standing as a pillar of the Irish-American community in Newton. "Mr. Sullivan is a respected member of this community," said his lead attorney, James O'Brien, a silver-haired man who radiated Old Boston establishment authority. "He's donated thousands of dollars to local charities, provided jobs for dozens of people, and built a successful business that contributes to our city's economy." Ms. Murphy's vindictive actions didn't just hurt Mr. Sullivan, they hurt everyone who depends on him. When it was my turn to testify, Martinez kept it simple, but I could feel the weight of every eye in the courtroom. "Ms. Murphy, why did you tell Mrs. Sullivan about her husband's affair?" I practiced this answer 100 times, But sitting there in the witness box, facing Michael's furious glare and the judge's impassive stare, the words I'd prepared felt inadequate. Because she deserved to know, I said finally. Because living a lie isn't really living at all. Were you aware that telling her might cost you your job? Yes. Were you aware it might lead to legal consequences? I suspected it might. Then why did you do it? To project a confidence I didn't feel. David's attorney painted me as a vindictive employee who'd betrayed her employer's trust, destroyed a marriage out of spite, and caused irreparable harm to two innocent children. They brought in character witnesses who testified to David's reputation in the business community, his charitable work, his standing as a pillar of the community. When it was my turn to testify, Martinez kept it simple. Miss Chin, why did you tell Mrs. Hartwell about her husband's affair? I'd practiced this answer 100 times, but sitting there in the witness box, facing David's furious glare, the words I'd prepared felt inadequate. Because she deserved to know, I said finally. Because living a lie isn't really living at all. Were you aware that telling her might cost you your job? Yes. Were you aware it might lead to legal consequences? I suspected it might. Then why did you do it? I looked out at the gallery where Elizabeth Sullivan sat in the third row. She'd lost weight since I'd last seen her, her face drawn with exhaustion and stress, but her eyes were clear, resolved. Behind her, I could see my mother, her expression unreadable but present, the first time she'd shown up for anything important in my life in years. Because some things are more important than a job, I said, my voice growing stronger. Some things are more important than being safe. O'Brien objected that I was making a speech rather than answering questions, but the judge allowed it. I could see the jury leaning forward, actually listening. Because I've spent my whole life watching good people get hurt by other people's lies, and I couldn't be part of it anymore. Michael's lawyers called it a compelling story but argued that good intentions didn't excuse bad actions. They reminded the jury that contracts existed for a reason, that confidentiality agreements protected legitimate business interests, that employees couldn't simply decide which rules they wanted to follow. O'Brien painted a picture of chaos. What would happen if every employee felt entitled to betray their employer's trust based on personal moral judgments? If we allow this kind of vigilante justice, he argued, no business relationship will be safe. No confidence will be sacred. Ms. Murphy may believe she was acting righteously, but the law exists to prevent exactly this kind of individual moral crusading. Martinez's closing was simpler but more emotional. He talked about the difference between legal obligations and human ones, about the courage it takes to choose truth over comfort. But I could see some of the jurors looking skeptical, and I knew it wasn't enough. When the judge called for final statements, I thought we were done. What I wasn't prepared for was Martinez turning to me and saying, "Do you want to make a statement?" "I'm not sure that's advisable," he added quietly. "But it's your right." I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. I hadn't prepared for this moment, hadn't written a speech or practiced in front of a mirror. But as I walked to the front of the courtroom, something my therapist, Dr. Ryan, had told me years ago came back to me. The truth doesn't have to be perfect to be powerful. "Your Honor," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. Then I cleared my throat and tried again, louder this time. "Your Honor, I know what I did was legally questionable. I understand why Mr. Hartwell is angry, why he feels betrayed. But I want to tell you about another kind of betrayal. When I was 8 years old, I found letters in my father's briefcase. Love letters to a woman who wasn't my mother. I was too young to understand what they meant, but I knew they were important, knew they were secret. So I did what 8-year-olds do. I told my mom. She didn't believe me at first. Said I must have misunderstood, that Daddy loved us, that families don't lie to each other. But eventually she confronted him. He denied it, called me a liar, said I was making up stories for attention. My mother believed him because she wanted to believe him, because the alternative was too painful. The affair continued for 3 more years. 3 years of my mother slowly losing herself, becoming suspicious and bitter and broken. 3 years of family dinners where we all pretended everything was fine while the foundation of our world cracked beneath us. When the truth finally came out, when my father's mistress got pregnant and he couldn't hide anymore, my mother looked at me and said, "Why didn't you try harder to make me listen?" I was 11 years old, Your Honor. 11 years old, and I thought it was my fault that our family fell apart. That if I'd been braver, more persistent, more convincing, maybe things would have been different. I've spent 20 years in therapy learning that it wasn't my fault. That children shouldn't have to carry adult secrets. That the person responsible for destroying a marriage is the person who breaks their vows, not the person who reveals the breaking. But I also learned something else. I learned what it costs to stay silent. I learned what it does to a person to know the truth and do nothing with it. I learned that secrets are like poison. They don't just hurt the people keeping them, they hurt everyone around them. When I saw Mr. Hartwell with that woman, when I heard him lying to his wife, when Mrs. Hartwell called to thank me for taking care of her husband, I couldn't be 8 years old again. I couldn't choose silence over truth, comfort over courage. I didn't tell Mrs. Hartwell about the affair to hurt Mr. Hartwell. I didn't do it for revenge or spite or any of the reasons his lawyers have suggested. I did it because she deserved the truth. Because her daughters deserved a mother who could make informed decisions about their future. Because someone needed to care enough about this family to tell them what was really happening to it. Mr. Hartwell says I destroyed his marriage. But I didn't make him cheat. I didn't make him lie. I didn't make him choose another woman over his wife and daughters. All I did was refuse to be complicit in the destruction he was already causing. Yes, I broke confidentiality. Yes, I violated my employment agreement. Yes, I knew there would be consequences. But some things are more important than contracts, Your Honor. Some things are more important than keeping our jobs or protecting our reputations or maintaining the status quo. Truth is one of those things. The right of a woman to know what's happening in her own marriage is one of those things. The obligation we have to each other, to the people in our lives who are being lied to and betrayed and deceived, that's one of those things too. I'm not asking you to find that what I did was legal. Maybe it wasn't. I'm asking you to find that what I did was human. That sometimes, being human is more important than being right. That sometimes, love requires us to risk everything to protect the people who can't protect themselves. Mrs. Hartwell couldn't protect herself from a lie she didn't know was being told. Her daughters couldn't protect themselves from a family that was built on deception. So I did what I could. I told the truth. And I'd do it again. I walked back to my seat in complete silence. The judge stared at me for a long moment, then looked at David, then at Rebecca in the gallery. Finally, he turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard compelling arguments on both sides of this case. You must now deliberate on the facts as presented and determine whether the defendant's actions, however well-intentioned, constitute a legal breach worthy of damages. But before the jury could leave for deliberation, something unexpected happened. The judge called both legal teams to the bench for a whispered conference that lasted nearly 10 minutes. When they returned, David's lawyer looked shaken. Your Honor, he said, after consultation with my client, we'd like to withdraw the suit. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. I turned to Martinez, confused. What does that mean? It means you win, he whispered back. It means it's over. Later, in the hallway outside the courtroom, Rebecca approached me. She looked different, tired but somehow lighter, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The divorce was finalized last week, she said quietly. Joint custody, fair settlement. The girls are doing better than I expected. I'm glad, I said and meant it. David's lawyer advised him to drop the suit. Said your testimony changed the optics. Made him look vindictive. She paused, studying my face. He's also facing potential disciplinary action from the state bar. Apparently, dating clients violates professional ethics rules, and Melissa was a client. I felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and sadness. Justice, maybe, but no real winners. I got a job, Rebecca continued. Head of pediatric surgery at Children's Hospital in Portland. Fresh start for me and the girls. That's wonderful. I wanted to thank you, she said, for giving me back my life. For caring enough to tell me the truth when no one else would. I lost my career over it, I said, surprised by my own honesty. I know, and I'm sorry for that. But Sarah, you saved me from wasting years of my life living a lie. You gave me the chance to find real happiness instead of settling for fake contentment. That's worth something. She hugged me then, and for the first time in months, I felt like maybe the cost had been worth it after all. That was 6 months ago. I'm working now, nothing glamorous, just administrative work at a nonprofit in Jamaica Plain that helps women transition out of abusive relationships. The pay is terrible and the office coffee is worse, but I sleep well at night. The work feels meaningful in a way my old job never did. I help coordinate support groups, manage intake interviews, and sometimes just sit with women who need someone to listen while they figure out their next steps. My mother and I are talking again, really talking, for the first time in years. The night after the trial, she showed up at my apartment with a bottle of Jameson and 2 glasses. I was wrong, she said without preamble. About your father, about keeping quiet, about blaming you for things that were never your fault. We sat on my small couch, sipping whiskey and talking until 3 in the morning. She told me about the years of suspicion, the receipts she'd found and ignored, the lies she'd chosen to believe because the truth was too painful. She apologized for not listening when I tried to tell her about Dad's affair, for making me carry that burden alone. I thought keeping the family together was more important than anything else, she said, her voice thick with regret. I thought if we just pretended hard enough, maybe it would become real. But all I did was teach you that truth was dangerous, that speaking up would only make things worse. We're both in therapy now, separately and sometimes together, trying to untangle decades of dysfunction and hurt. It's slow work, painful work, but it's honest work. For the first time in my life, I feel like I have a real relationship with my mother instead of just a performance we both agreed to maintain. The job search had been brutal initially. Word traveled fast through Boston's tight professional network, and Michael had made good on his threat to poison my reputation. But slowly, things began to change. Some of the people who'd contacted me during the trial started reaching out with opportunities. A woman named Mary Collins, who ran a domestic violence shelter in Roxbury, had followed the case and offered me a position. "We need people who understand the cost of silence," she told me during my interview. "People who know that sometimes the right thing and the safe thing are completely different." I still don't know if what I did was legally right. The judge never ruled on it. The jury never deliberated, and legal scholars could probably argue both sides for hours. But I know it was morally right, at least for me. I know I couldn't have lived with myself if I'd stayed silent. Sometimes I run into people from my old life. Jennifer from accounting pretended not to see me at the Star Market in Porter Square. Tom from business development crossed the street when he spotted me walking down Newberry. But others have surprised me. A client I'd worked with, Patricia Kennedy from the Back Bay Historical Society, went out of her way to thank me when she saw me at the public garden. "My husband cheated on me for 2 years," she said quietly. "His secretary knew, his partners knew, even some of our friends knew. But nobody told me. I had to find out when she called our house by mistake one night. I would have given anything for someone to care enough about me to tell me the truth. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd made a different choice. If I'd kept Michael's secret, kept my job, kept my comfortable, unremarkable life. Maybe Elizabeth would have found out eventually anyway. Maybe she would have been better off not knowing. Maybe those little girls would have been happier with an intact family built on lies than a broken one built on truth." But then I remember being 8 years old, carrying a secret too big for a child to bear. I remember my mother's face when she finally learned the truth, not just hurt, but relieved, devastated, but free. I remember the weight that lifted from her shoulders when she finally stopped pretending, stopped making excuses, stopped living in the space between knowing and not knowing. I think about the messages I received from strangers who wished they'd been brave enough to speak up, who regretted their silence more than they could ever regret the consequences of honesty. I think about the women at my new job who tell me that someone finally caring enough to tell them the truth about their abusive partners saved their lives, gave them permission to stop making excuses and start making plans. Truth is a dangerous thing. It can destroy marriages, end careers, shatter families, and leave everyone involved scarred and struggling. But lies are dangerous too, maybe more dangerous, because they destroy people slowly, from the inside out, in ways that are harder to see and heal. The woman who sits across from me during intake interviews, her face purple with bruises she insists came from falling downstairs. She's living with the same kind of lie I helped Elizabeth escape. The difference is that her lie might kill her if no one speaks up. I chose truth over comfort, courage over safety, love over law. It cost me almost everything I thought I wanted. But it gave me something I didn't know I needed, the ability to look at myself in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. I'm not the same woman who used to keep her head down and hope for the best. I'm not the same woman who thought that flying under the radar was the safest way to live. I'm someone who believes that we owe each other honesty, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I don't know if that makes me brave or foolish, righteous or reckless. I don't know if I'm the hero of this story or just another flawed person who made the best choice she could with the information she had. What I do know is this: when someone's life is built on a lie, and you have the power to tell them the truth, staying silent isn't neutral. It's taking a side. It's choosing to protect the liar instead of the person being lied to. I couldn't make that choice. I couldn't be complicit in someone else's deception, even if speaking up meant risking everything. The cost was real. My old life is gone, the career, the financial security, the comfortable anonymity. But what I gained was something I'd never had before, the knowledge that when it mattered most, I chose courage over comfort. I chose truth over convenience. I chose to protect someone who couldn't protect herself instead of protecting someone who was actively causing harm. So here I am, 6 months later, sitting in my car outside a courthouse where a judge just dismissed a case that could have destroyed me financially. I'm making a third of what I used to make, living in a neighborhood I never planned to call home, working with women whose stories make my problems seem trivial. But I'm also free from secrets that weren't mine to keep, free from the weight of knowing truth and doing nothing with it. I suppose the question I'm left with is this. When you know something that could devastate someone but might also save them, what do you owe them? What do you owe yourself? When does loyalty become complicity, and when does honesty become cruelty? I made my choice, and I'm living with the consequences. The good and the bad, the relief and the regret, the pride and the pain. But I'm curious about yours. If you were in my position, if you knew your boss was cheating on his spouse, if you saw the pain in their eyes when they thanked you for taking care of them, if you had the power to tell them the truth but knew it might cost you everything, what would you do? Does choosing honesty over loyalty make me brave? Or does it just make me someone who couldn't mind her own business? Does the fact that it worked out in the end justify the risk I took? Or would I have been just as wrong if the consequences had been worse? I've been asking myself these questions for months now, and I still don't have perfect answers. Maybe there aren't any. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the questions matter more than the answers, and maybe asking them is what separates the people who speak up from the people who stay silent. All I know is that when I was 8 years old, I tried to tell the truth and no one listened. When I was 32, I tried again, and this time, someone did. I'd rather live with the consequences of speaking up than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd found the courage to try. But what would you do? Does that make me the bad guy?